can't believe I'm sharing this, but I used to live paycheck to paycheck even as my income grew. And I don't mean I was just scraping by on a low salary. At one point, I was making $90,000 a year. I think I even was making six figures, and I still felt like I couldn't get ahead. My money was always messy, it was always scattered, it was always stressful. It felt like what it felt when I was making $30,000 a year, and I just couldn't figure out why. Well, I kind of knew why. It was because I was spending a lot. Today, I'm in a completely different place. I designed my money system with intention, and I actually feel financially secure. Real talk, I do not have FU money just yet. You know, that level of money where you can walk away from work forever and just chill for the rest of your life. I'm not there yet, but I do feel so confident in my financial life. And that's what most of us really want, to feel secure. In this video, I will show you the simple system that took me from being stressed out about money all the time to becoming a confident wealth builder. So for a little bit of context, I am a daughter of immigrant parents. My parents both immigrated from the Philippines, and they taught me some lessons about how to work hard, how to spend smart, and how to be frugal. And while I think those are great lessons, what I didn't learn was how to organize money for the future or how to invest for long-term wealth. I think I've mentioned this in previous videos, but I avoided advanced finance classes and economics classes in college because I was worried about hurting my GPA. My finances stayed messy and stayed scattered until I finally proactively decided to learn about personal finance, get organized, and just start doing all the things. This was not until a couple of years ago in my 30s. Now, I'm gonna pull back the curtain on the exact steps that I took, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So quick disclaimer, if you happen to watch my last video, you'll know that this 3-step blueprint I'm gonna walk you through is not something I consciously, proactively followed. It's only now that I can look back in hindsight and see the shifts that I made that worked. I wish I had a blueprint back in the day because I think I would have been able to figure it out a lot faster, but it is what it is. Now that I have this experience and I've made a lot of mistakes, it's motivated me to help all of you avoid those mistakes and start your wealth building journey a lot faster. For those of you who are new here, welcome. I am Lissa. I'm a personal finance expert and a certified financial planner. My mission is to make wealth building accessible to all of you without the guilt, without the shame, and without the gatekeeping. So let's get into it. Here is how I organized my finances to build wealth. Let's start with what I did wrong. Before I ever learned about systems or financial planning, I saved money in chunks. So I consider this my pre-personal finance era. And if you want to put some dates on it, let's say around 2009 to 2017, this was when I had my first big girl job, my first full-time job, up until the time where I was about 6 years into working at Google. In this pre-personal finance era, I wasn't trying to learn wealth building strategies or learn more about money. I was not intentional. So here's what it looked like. I would get motivated, I would maybe cut back on spending, and then maybe I would transfer more and more money into my savings account whenever I had the opportunity. But then something would come up. Maybe it was an emergency. Around 2010, there was this 1-month span where I had to get knee surgery, and I also had to fly back home for my dad's funeral. These were not things I planned for, so they came out of whatever little savings I did have. Between those types of emergencies, big purchases I wanted to make, and even fun things like taking vacations, I would dip into my account, watch the balance go down, and then feel like I had to start over again. But at the very least, I knew how to save. The problem is that it became this endless cycle. I would save, and then I would spend, and then I would save, and then I would spend. It would just repeat itself. But sometimes it was even worse. I would spend money that I didn't have yet, right? In the form of credit cards and loans, because these expenses would come up that I felt like were urgent or once in a lifetime. I would throw it on a credit card. I'd promise myself I would pay it back later because I had a regular income. I knew I would get money later. So yes, I know that that's not the most financially responsible choice, but I'm just being real with you because not only did I do this in the past, I see this a lot with clients and I know it's very common. I wish it wasn't common, but it's real. It's a real problem that a lot of people face. For me, the real problem was without having a plan, I never felt secure. Even those times when I was doing really well with saving, when I had several thousands of dollars saved, I just didn't feel like I was building anything. I felt like I was constantly scrambling to refill that bucket every time I took money from it. Now, on top of all of that, because I relied so heavily on my job, it was the only source of income I had, I pushed myself harder than ever at my job. I worked late nights, I worked weekends, I worked extra. I stressed myself out trying to prove my value to my job, to my manager, so that I would never get laid off. Back then, I didn't understand that sometimes layoffs just happen and it has nothing to do with you, the person. It has to do with the business figuring out what's best for the business. So if any of this sounds familiar, let me say this, it's okay. Most of us don't learn practical personal finance anytime in school or even in adulthood. When we finally do learn about money, it often comes later in life. It often comes with us being reactive to some situation that happened, and it often happens after we have already built these habits that don't serve us and that are really hard to let go. That's the trap of continuing to go about your personal finances without having a solid system. Not having a system kept me stuck. So that's why I knew I had to change my approach and do things differently if I wanted to see change. So step number one, I had to define my financial goals. The first big shift that I made was defining some big financial goals for myself, but more importantly, understanding my why behind those goals. So this pre-personal finance era, 2009 to 2017-ish, my only goal was I want more money. I just wanted to save more. I wanted to make more. That was the only goal I had. And honestly, in hindsight, I believe that that's a little vague if what you want is financial security. So what happened to me is I had a wake-up call. This was around 2017. It's when I had a layoff scare. A new VP came into my department and she looked at the org chart and decided that my particular role wasn't necessary. Basically, she said, we don't need that role. Let's get rid of it so that she could hire someone else in another role. HR was kind enough to pull me aside and in the nicest way possible, they basically nudged me and said,
hey, nothing is finalized yet, but you might want to start looking for another job.
When they told me that, I'm grateful they did because they told me that to give me a few extra weeks until this decision became finalized. Now, once HR did this, I freaked out. I panicked so hard because not only was I living paycheck to paycheck and didn't really have a savings, I also owned a condo at that time and my mortgage payment was pretty high and I was freaking out like,
what happens if you can't pay your mortgage?
My home was going to be taken from me and I'd be homeless. I immediately started a spreadsheet, started listing out all the places I might apply for jobs, sent out a dozen applications to begin with in the first few days, and I hardly got a call back. I didn't get any offers and I just freaked out some more. Now, because I was so scared about what would happen if I lost my source of income, I also decided to sell my condo. Luckily for me, at the time, I had owned it for 3 years and my place had appreciated by over $200,000. I couldn't stand the thought of not being able to pay my mortgage if I lost my job, so I thought, let me get ahead of it. Let me sell my condo, even though I loved it, and let me take that money and then start fresh. So fast forward a few weeks, my job, they decided to keep my role. I stayed. I ended up staying. And I was happy to. I liked my job, I liked my department, I liked the people, I liked my salary and all the benefits I got at that job. But the damage was done. Mentally and emotionally, I knew that I never wanted to feel that powerless again. Around that time, I also had to borrow money from 2 different friends because when I sold my place, I had to fix some mold damage, which ended up costing like $7,000 that I didn't have. So again, I was like, I never want to have to borrow from friends again. For me, that's when my goals became clear. I knew, one, that I wanted enough savings and investments to feel secure in case I lost my job. Another goal I had was I wanted long-term wealth through property ownership. Rather than buying a home that I was going to live in, I wanted to buy a home with the purpose of it being an investment, whether that was selling it when it appreciated, like I happened to do with the first place I owned, or through cash flow, having rental income. And the third financial goal that became clear to me around this time was that I wanted independence from my career. I never wanted to rely on one paycheck to determine the fate of my entire future ever again. So let me be clear. At that time, in 2017-ish, I didn't know that what I was doing was defining my financial goals and understanding my why. I just knew that these are the things that I wanted to do, that I had to do, that I was gonna focus on because I knew it was gonna make me feel empowered and make me feel more secure about my situation rather than depend on this job. Looking back, the biggest mindset shift that I had was rather than just saving aimlessly, saving endlessly until I use the money to buy VIP concert tickets, instead of doing all that, I decided I'm saving for this and that and investing for this and that, all with intention. So if you're watching this, this is the step that I want you to take as well. I want you to ask yourself, what do I want my money for and when will I need it in the future? Step number 2, in order to execute on my plan, I had to match my goals to the right accounts, the right savings and investment strategies that worked for me. So in my pre-personal finance era, I was saving a bunch of money into one savings account. That's why I always felt like I was starting over whenever I dipped into that savings account. So around 2017, when I decided I wanted all of these goals, that's when I started learning about personal finance. I learned some things about different accounts, and here's how I ended up breaking down my system at the time. First off, for my current needs, I had checking accounts. I had 2 different checking accounts for different needs. Overall, that was my day-to-day spending money. Rent, groceries, utilities. I made sure that I had 1 to 2 months worth of expenses in there so that I never had to stress about overdrafting or about making late payments to any bills. This was around the time that I learned what an emergency fund was. So I started saving towards my emergency fund. I opened a brand new account for it. It was a high yield savings account. Then I set up a direct deposit from every paycheck to put $100 into that account until I didn't notice it. When I didn't notice that the 100 was gone, I increased the amount. Eventually, I started putting $300 a paycheck, sometimes adding more in between. Within a year, I had a 5-figure emergency fund, and just having that account gave me peace of mind. I knew that even if I got laid off, I could get by for at least a couple of months without having to worry. Next was my short-term goal of getting an investment property. This one I knew was going to take a couple of years, and so I had a mix of accounts. I did open a second high yield savings account so I could start saving for the down payment, but I also experimented with a robo-advisor account. And on top of that, this was also my era of dipping into crypto. This is not a recommendation. I'm just being honest with you about the different things that I tried according to my risk tolerance. I am generally very risk tolerant, so even though I had all these different things going on with my finances, I wanted to try new investments and see how it went. So these various accounts where I was saving money were part of my plan towards buying property again in the future as soon as I could. Finally, for long-term growth, these were investment accounts, including my retirement account, my 401k, and also a regular taxable brokerage account. Again, these aren't recommendations because your situation and your goals might be different, but I want to share with you what I did because I didn't know at the time what I was doing. I didn't know that I was matching my goal to the savings and investment accounts that I opened up. In hindsight, I can tell you that's exactly what I was doing, and it definitely helped me organize my financial life when I had a plan that worked for me. It was also around this time that I learned what a Roth IRA was, which is an account here in the United States that is known for its tax advantages because you contribute after-tax money, your money grows, and then in retirement, you can withdraw money without having to pay income taxes. What I found out at this time was that my income was above the phase out limit, which meant that I could not directly contribute to a Roth IRA. But this also sparked my interest in learning more about it, and I learned about backdoor Roth conversions as something I could think about later. I'm sharing this to illustrate that I did not know it all, and it was a lot of trial and error and learning things on the fly, figuring things out. But what I was doing at this point was I was being more intentional. I was taking my financial education into my own hands and figuring out what are all the things I could possibly be doing to make sure that I never feel what I felt at that time when I thought I was gonna lose it all. So step 2 was, for me, figuring out, all right, I have all these goals. Where am I gonna put the money for all these goals so that some of it is safe and easily accessible for me in the near future, and some of it can hopefully grow over time so that I can dip into it later. Step 3 was setting realistic amounts that I could put aside. So I already mentioned how I started putting money in my emergency fund, and I started with $100 per paycheck. I was able to do this because I had a pretty solid income and I was able to just cut back on my expenses to free up a little bit of money to put in my emergency fund. But the most interesting part is when I forgot that I was even doing that direct deposit and then I remembered about it, I would increase it by $25, by $50, so that over time, I'm not noticing that I'm losing that money. It just made me spend less. And because I was spending on so many things that probably didn't bring value to my life, it really didn't feel like a lot. To summarize, a couple of the things that worked for me when it came to making these different contributions and savings is starting small. Start small so that it doesn't hurt, it doesn't feel like it impacts your life in a crazy way. And then if you can, increase it over time. Number 2, test different amounts until it just feels natural and smooth. If you end up contributing too much and you feel like you have no money for your day-to-day life and you're starting to go in debt for some reason, you have to switch up that amount, because the worst thing you can do for your finances is go in debt while you're trying to also grow your wealth. Finally, when you have an opportunity like a windfall, maybe you get a tax refund, maybe you get a bonus, maybe you work a side gig, use those extra windfalls of money to increase your contributions and increase your savings. I think the smartest thing I did was not try to max everything out immediately, but it was just building the habit of consistency. In about a 2-year span, my accounts grew so quickly. I had an emergency fund that made me feel safe. My retirement accounts were compounding, and I think it was around that era for the first time I had even maxed out my retirement account for 1 or 2 years. The key was just being intentional, and that's what broke the cycle. I could go on and on about what happened during that transformational period for me. The downside for me was that I was reacting to this negative thing that happened, this layoff scare. Yes, I was blessed that I didn't actually get laid off, but I was so stressed out while that whole thing was going down. The bright side is that it kicked me into gear. Within a few years, I was able to buy an investment property that I could house hack, renting out a couple of the rooms. It actually convinced me to take some classes, do some professional development outside of work, and also start a business in which I learned more about tax write-offs, and it gave me the confidence to know that I could actually make money outside of my main job. Funny enough, about 4 or 5 years later, after that layoff scare, I was actually laid off. But this time it was so different. I'm so happy I made that transformation. Granted, it was the result of feeling very anxious about my finances around 2017. My hope is for you that you don't wait until some big financial crisis happens to you to turn things around. But now, maybe when everything's kind of chill, maybe now is the time that you're like, all right, let me be proactive now so that I will be prepared if and when anything crazy, any crisis happens in the future. All right, in the next video, I'm gonna break down the biggest money mistakes that keep people broke, including some mistakes that I made as well, so that hopefully you can avoid them on your own journey to wealth. Until next time, peace out.